I started by planing some stock for the drawer sides to 10mm thick. I then ripped that into strips the width of the drawer front. I cut the sides slightly longer than they needed to be, and I cut the back to the exact same length as the front. For the drawer front, I decided to use half-blind dovetails so that the joints wouldn't be seen when the drawer was closed. However, for the back of the drawer, I just went for 3 dovetails for simplicity. For the half-blind dovetails, the tails are cut in exactly the same way as for a through dovetail, which I covered in my previous video, so I won't go into detail on that now. For the pins, however, I started by making diagonal cuts on the 2 open faces of the joint, so the side and the back of the drawer front. I then removed the waste using a chisel, almost down to the final depth. I then placed the work vertically in the vise and made sure to slightly undercut both the bottom and the back of the joint so that they didn't interfere with the joint seating correctly. Likewise, I chamfered the bottom edges of the tails so that any rubbish left in the corners of the joint wouldn't interfere with the joint seating. Once I'd removed all the waste, I could then start test fitting the joint. I did this by placing the tailboard on top of the pinboard and seeing where it was obstructing it. I could then shave off a small amount at a time, remembering that you can always remove more material, but it's very hard to add some back on. So remove a bit, test it, remove a bit, test it, remove a bit, test it, and so on until it fits perfectly. Once I was happy with the fit, I could then move over to the router table, where I cut grooves in all 4 sides of the drawer, remembering to stop short on the sides of the drawer at the through dovetail end, so that the slot didn't show at the back of the drawer. I then milled up some stock for the drawer bottom to fit into those grooves. I took a 12mm thick board that had a fairly large cup in it, and jointed the cup side until it was flat. Between passes over the jointer, I placed it on the cast iron bed of the jointer to check how flat it was, and if it wasn't flat, then I'd pass it over the jointer again. Once that side was flat, I could then pass it through the planer and get it to around 6mm thick. I wanted it just thicker than the width of the router cutter that I was going to use for cutting the grooves, so that I would have room to remove any of the planing marks without making the board too thin. I cut the board into the 2 halves of the drawer bottom, which technically aren't book matched since they're cut end to end from the board rather than side by side. However, the grain is a very close match, so it looks book matched. Once the panels were glued up, I could then go ahead and use the card scraper to get a good surface finish on both sides and take it down to the final thickness. For the drawer pull, I used some scrap cherry and turned it to a shape that felt right. I used a spindle gouge and a skew chisel to rough out the shape. Then I finessed that shape using some files and finished it up with some sandpaper up to 320 grit. I turned a 7mm tenon on one end, using a wrench to gauge the correct diameter. I then marked up the centre of the drawer front by connecting the 2 diagonals, and then drilled a 7mm hole with the drill press in the centre of the drawer front. I only drilled halfway through so that the hole wasn't visible on the inside of the drawer, and then the 7mm tenon on the drawer pull could then slot into this hole. Here you can see the whole drawer fully assembled and working. In the next video I'll be working on some general assembly, so I'll be making the drawer runners, fitting the hinges and finishing up the lid. Thanks for watching.